All right. Every week I forget to hit record at the start. So here I am hitting record again. So we're going to talk about this idea of how to identify visual leverage and essentially how to look at a business, whether it's your business or a business that you're working for, interacting with, providing services to, and figure out how to create some form of what I'm calling visual leverage, which is essentially just this tool that allows you to take advantage of a couple of different things. I'm going to explain those in more detail, but before I get into that, just wanted to start with this idea and the notion that so many people rely on visual communication in order to learn. 67% of people identify as visual learners. Not sure how they're measuring that, but seems true, anecdotally speaking. And what that means is, if you're not using visuals to communicate whatever it is you're selling, doing, teaching, then you're only really allowing 1 in 3 people in your audience to grapple with whatever the concept is that you are putting over. So if you're selling something, you have your close rate, obviously, but that close rate is then further impacted by the fact that, in a lot of cases, the person you're talking to can't follow what you're saying because you haven't got a visual way to represent it. So only 1 in 3 people have enough information to even consider working with you in some cases. So here's an example of somebody I worked with last year who is an e-commerce. They run an agency, but it's really focused on scaling e-commerce brands. And the guy who runs it is like a very charismatic, great talker. He is like a great communicator verbally, but after he kind of gets onto this riff of explaining what they do, there's so much of an intellectual gap in experience with what he knows and how he understands all the pieces fitting together. What comes out of his mouth is intelligent, but it isn't landing on the client side. So we worked through this process together, and his feedback was, as soon as we started to put this into a sequence where people could follow it visually, the difference is just astronomical in the concepts that people can grasp onto, and they can point to parts of the process and ask questions. And I think there's also an element of people not wanting to feel like they aren't following verbally. So in some of the worlds that I've worked in my career, there's this kind of this sort of culture of nodding along even if you're not following. I'm sure everybody's experienced that in some way, shape or form, whatever industry you work in. And what creating and using visuals tends to do is, allows everybody to sort of follow the route, follow the map, and be on the same page about the story that's being told and the things that are being discussed. So that's been true of the experience I've had working through this process with people. And also, I think just something that I've picked up as something that helps me grasp a concept or helps me learn something is either consuming it visually or creating something visually gives me a better understanding of what it is I'm selling or talking about or trying to explain. So this is an example of this in the wild. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about all the levers that the visual leverage as an advantage creates for a business. So obviously, this idea of packaging something that has a higher perceived value just allows you to charge more for it. So you're positioned differently in the market. You show up to a meeting with a 15-page polished document that allows you to walk through the process that you're going to provide, and that in itself just positions you as a more qualified answer to a problem than somebody on the phone just sort of riffing a sales pitch. Time, there's another huge benefit to creating this repeatable system, not only for you as an individual where you're following the same story each time, you're not going off on tangents and spending time preparing for meetings and thinking about how something's going to be pitched each time. You have this asset that just creates saves you a bunch of time and also helps you scale your sales process by giving the same tool to your people and teaching people internally and all of that good stuff. Ease of sale is another great advantage of having a visual story, because we have that alignment from start to finish, and you get heads nodding in the room. Everybody is in tune with the story being told, and typically, in all of the examples that I've experienced, this has led to a much less high friction sales conversation at the end, because there really are no questions left to answer if this job's been done really well. And then differentiation, similar to price, but if you're being compared to another service or another company that aren't using a technique like this, or don't have a way to position themselves or tell a story visually, then you just come out way ahead when somebody's, even if you're not in the room with them, they're thinking back on the 3 pitches they heard, let's say. The one that walked them through the story and gave them this visual point of reference and helped them understand how the process worked is more likely to be the top contender when all said and done. And then confidence is a mutual benefit for you as a storyteller or a salesperson, and obviously confidence is transferred to whoever it is you're talking to as well, because you have that mutual understanding and that point of reference that's kind of connecting the two of you. So those are the 5 things that you can expect to sort of get these points of leverage if you develop a visual story that will help your clients or your internal stakeholders, whoever it is, follow along with what you're trying to explain. So the next piece is, so how do you identify that? How do you find these elements within a business or within your process or within your product to visualize? I don't think this is an extensive list, but it's at a high level. I didn't want to go into like an insane amount of detail here, but I think these are really great principles to sort of start to identify and start to carve up and organize information to visualize. And that's sequences. So simply explained as, if you have an agency business, then I'm going to talk about agency businesses as the examples where most of my experience is. So a sequence there is, understanding and diagnosing a problem, putting together a solution based on like a productized system that you have in place, how you review that work, how it gets launched into the real world, how you capture feedback, and how that feedback then informs the development of the product. So it's essentially a way to visualize start to finish. If we're going on a journey, here's where we start, here's the next stop, here's the stop after that, here's the stop after that, and here's where we want to end up. And then if we're going to take the journey again, here are the things we learned. So that's sequence. And, that can be visualized as a timeline, as, step by step. I think everybody has a concept of, how to visualize a sequence. Everybody's seen a sequence visualized, but a lot of the time we just don't think about our own work or our own products or processes in sequence. Transformation is a very simple idea. It's just this idea of creating comparisons visually. So, there's disorganized, organized, there's before us, after us, there's anything you can think of that creates contrast. There's a way for you to visualize that transition. And this doesn't necessarily have to be graphic design. The context of everything that I'm presenting is graphic design because that's my skill set. But even a visual that has a connotation of one feeling versus another is a way to depict transformation. Recipes is another good one. So if you're selling a result, then a recipe is kind of, reverse engineering and visualizing how that result comes about. So it might be this person working with this person creates this, this layered knowledge that can solve that problem. It might be this process. We have to, take material X, put it through this process, it becomes this, then that refined version goes through this process, then that goes through this process, and it ends up as this. So think about recipes as another way to reverse engineer, like, okay, how how did this end product come about, and how can I like really simplify the process. It doesn't have to be exactly how you do it as a service provider, but it should feel like if you give somebody the tools and the experience you had, they could recreate that recipe. That's another way that people begin to trust you as a service provider, because you're showing how the sausage is made to some extent. It's not you going and selling a result and then outsourcing that work without exposing your depth of knowledge on how that result is going to be generated. So it's another way to build trust, is to show this plus this plus this equals this, and we're experts at every stage of the journey. Then hierarchies is a little bit of a different idea, but if you're thinking about processes or recipes, then there are certain things that take more precedent than others. As a couple of visual examples I'll show here to demonstrate all of these, but hierarchy is really a different idea, where if you're building a narrative, I think of it a little bit like a book. So you have the title of the book, you have the chapter titles within that book, and then you have each of the chapters, which may even be further organized. So you kind of think of that as a funnel of information, where you have a really high level anchor, and then you get slowly more and more granular. So there's ways to sort of segment that out, whatever it is you do. There's, the headline version, there's the subheadline under each of those headlines, and then there's the chapter that fits under the subhead. So hopefully that's a lens that you can apply to whatever it is you're thinking about, and start to organize that stuff in the same way that you would take somebody's life and write the chapters of an autobiography, for example. So that's another mechanism that you can overlay on top of a business, and think about, if I was to write a book about this thing, how would it work, and what concept makes sense to introduce at what point, what background knowledge do I need before I talk about chapter 3 to introduce character or place in chapter 1 and 2. Hopefully that's a decent metaphor. So I actually pulled in an example from a friend of mine, Carl Richards, on visualizing comparison. This is just a very timely example right now. There's a lot of volatility in the markets. So this idea, this is just masterfully simple. The idea of, if you're invested in a market, you look at the charts on a daily basis, it's absolute chaos, right? Especially in the last week or so, bouncing up and down. If you zoom out and you get perspective on that over the course of 10, 20, 30 years, it's just a slow and steady rise. So this is a concept where we're using comparison visually to just change someone's mindset and expose them to, if you shift your perspective, this is a different way to think about the same thing. Essentially, you're just looking at it from a different perspective. So that's how to visualize comparison. There's a couple other examples in there on comparison, but it could be from where you're standing. It could be from state A to state B. It could be working with us versus not working with us. Just think about these contrasting situations that you can create really simple visuals to just highlight the difference between those two situations. Good, bad, hot, cold. It's very, very simple device, but once you add visual to it, people just kind of, it clicks. Another example, this was a project I worked on a long time ago. This guy is a CFO, so it's full on financial support for small businesses. And the visual metaphor here is just this increase in connectivity and ultimately transformation over the course of the different options that are available in the market. So if you're looking at your financial picture as an individual, you see a little bit of it. A bookkeeper understands and keeps track of all the pieces. An accountant can kind of piece it together, but a CFO has complete oversight, connectivity, understands what plugs in where and how it all works together. So another simple metaphor, but when you present that to somebody, the idea that you're implying and confirming the situation they're in over here on the left, where it's you don't have full insight and full transparency into what's going on. which situation would you rather be in? This one on the left where you're kind of sitting in the dark, or this one on the right where, you know, you're completely protected by this professional insight? Another example of this is another sequence example. So this is the same example I gave a couple slides ago, the glass elephant example, the guy that pitches e-commerce services. So this is a sequence of how they organize their consulting services, and it's organized in the sequence products are made. So the manufacturing of the product, then the shipping and movement of the product, then they have the kind of customer interface, so their ability to create a brand and a web presence, and then the final piece is how you connect that physical product that is now branded to an audience or to a end consumer, and that's content and digital advertising. So you show the scope of their capabilities, and you also show this sequence of events that exposes whoever you're talking to both the breadth of your expertise and the logic that sits behind how you go about the process. So this is a good example of how you can use sequence to kind of have a great conversation at a high level about what it is you do, and like all of the services that you're able to offer, or all of the kind of facets of your product. You can then dive into each of these segments and sections as part of that hierarchy. So each of these six sections could then segment off down into these sections of a document that speak specifically to your capabilities in manufacturing, logistics, identity design, web presence, etc. And then you can have your short version of the document that shows that sequence from left to right, and then you can have your uber long version of the document that is your full-on 100-page prospectus that goes into massive detail, explaining every single one of these little sections and subsections thereof. Another example of sequence, this is actually a business that I was involved in for a while. So it's a podcasting and content agency. And essentially, one of the problems we were running into early on was this idea that people didn't know where they were in the process. So we had really robust systems on the back end of the business, but we were getting a lot of friction happening on the front end, where people were confused as to what their responsibilities were, when they needed to do it, who and when approvals are required from. And this is a full on, this is the whole ecosystem of how content gets produced that we would use as this. There's a great metaphor that Jim, I don't know if he's on this call, came up with the first time we talked about this, which is it's very similar to having a sign on the back of a bar where you say no shoes, no shirt, no service. Like if you can point to where someone is in the journey, it's like it just completely dispels any argument about what happens next. So you're plotting out, especially if you run a service business, this end-to-end journey, and it's almost like that map that you get in a shopping center where it says you are here in front of shop X, and there's the sequence that will lead you to this place means you'll have to pass this, and this. So it's a really powerful way to keep your clients on track and to also organize your internal teams. Another super simple flowchart. You can build this in browser tools now, draw.io, all of those tools that exist. It's a great way to also expose the depth of thought and all the pieces that would be required for somebody to build this product in-house. So Craig, you asked this question, so I think this is a good example of all of these things that need to exist for you to generate a result as an agency. Don't even attempt to do it yourself, because it's taken us 10 years to perfect this process, and this is what it looks like at a high level. All you have to do is drop in at the start, come in and approve a couple things in the middle, and at the end you get this beautiful polished result. Another example is these are kind of hybrid assets. So they're marketing assets that are you're still using this visual component, but we are like adding a little bit of a branded feel to these visual assets. So this is a similar process to a similar asset to a visualized value post, but this was for a client. And the idea that you can then insert the brand as an element in the visual. So the brand on this left-hand side asset is accelerating efficiency over time. So you don't necessarily have to explain the nuances of a process. You can just talk about a concept and put it put your brand in the context of that concept. So if you are, if your promise or your product is to, even like, let's say clean something or reduce the number of X particles in this lake, let's say, then you can plot that on a graph where it's, contaminant, this axis, and when you add our process, our brand, our people, you are reducing that. So like at a very high level, you can create a visual that just speaks to like, what are we about? We are about reducing or increasing X. Oh, that was a bit of a long-winded explanation, but in these couple other examples, these guys work in enterprise software. So we're using like visual metaphors from software to explain a couple of their services. Like, they know what data to look at. So highlighting these cells as, we're able to isolate the things that are important and extract the insight that actually makes a difference. This next example, another super simple example. This is a project I'm working on at the moment. The idea that, before you work with us, you're in this state, and after you work with us, you're in this state. So you can use language to accompany that, but there's, a lot of different visual metaphors you can use to say, okay, before you work with us, you're disorganized, you're disconnected, you are, all of the words that you could associate with a situation that is less than ideal. And then visually, you kind of bring that all together in a nice patterned, organized, less anxious looking state. So in this case, this is visualizing the difference between managing your money by talking to tax planners and inheritance people and your bank, your credit card company, all of that stuff, versus you hiring this company, having one representative that you speak to that goes back and forth with everybody and just completely consolidates the process for you. And, you're in a different headspace than you would have been if you were sitting on the left-hand side. And I just wanted to share a couple of examples of this, like zooming out from this process a little more. So showing a couple of different, like these aren't the full end states of these stories, but showing all of these different sort of metaphors and the different ways to organize information in context. So the idea of sequence is sequence you can see in the bottom right here, where there's a clear sequence to how the services are kind of bolted together that this supply chain company offers. There's a comparison example in the top left there, where you have the difference between how they stack pallets and how that affects the revenue that they drive over time. And then below that on the bottom left, you have just this, again, a comparison between depth of service. So on the left-hand side, these are our competitors. These are the basic services they offer. There's a sort of a tier 1 competitor, there's a tier 2 competitor, and then there's us. And we're like completely, the services we offer are just exponentially more detailed than anybody else in the market. And these are also great tools for, to give to your prospects to say, look, we'd be happy to give this to you, and you go and ask the people that we're pitching against whether or not they have, whether or not they're able to do all the things that we do. Like, this is not we're not claiming this without challenging it, you can go and take it to them and ask them if they can fulfill all of this stuff. Chances are it's not the case. And then this last piece is like, how do you take IP? How do you take a service that you've been providing through tools that already exist or processes that your team are implementing on a daily basis, and just sort of transform that into a curriculum of some sort? So this is the example I showed earlier of the outsourced CFO. You see that on the first slide in the top left, and how you take their philosophy into this visual sequence that they can then productize and sell as a course. So you just extract all of those different processes, sequences, recipes, and start to break them down visually, and then it gives them a way to sometimes it turns into a product for sale, but other times it's like a way to prime a client, or it's a way to, somebody that that isn't in a position to work with you one-on-one. You can give them these documents that are like, look, here's our thesis, here's the way we think, absorb as much of it as you can, and then, perhaps at some point in time, we'll work together. This is a great way of view into how our process works. And then the last piece, this is, you might recognize this, a couple slides ago we were talking about anxiety to assurance. That's one of these slides that you see on the left here, which is essentially this slide document that introduces one idea at a time and builds on this visual story. And then what that allows you to do is, on the right hand side, there's this one pager, which is, let's take all of those visual concepts out that are sort of the chapter headers, as it were, that I brought up earlier, and you organize them in a way that you could slide a single piece of paper across the table and say, here's this one sheet that explains our thesis. This is, our credentials at the top. This is how our process works in the middle here. And then these are our products. And this is how we're different from the rest of the market on the bottom. So once you've figured out those high level visual concepts and anchored these ideas, you can sort of dial up and down the complexity and depth of the story to serve the audience that you're talking to. I think that is the last slide. Cool. I'm going to open up for questions, and let me know. There were some moments in there that I may have like over or under shared. So if you want to give me any feedback as well, I'll be very open to hearing it.
Jack, I have a thought.
How you doing, Brian?
Good. So before you, I've only joined this first office hours, and I just recently haven't really participated much in the Visualize Value Slack channel. But I'm curious if you have a back-end offering that's bigger, or what's going on with your kind of like funnel. You've got the $19. You're giving away a lot of value on Twitter. You're giving away this office hours. You have a bigger thing that we can be aware of so that we know how to think about it for you?
Yeah, there's a couple different things. The bigger back end offer at the moment is the consulting product that we're taking businesses through this process of visualizing their value, and that normally takes the form of a sales document, a website, some printed collateral, some description. And I also just started testing a new offer, which is like a sort of entry-level consulting piece, which is going to be, let me share my screen here, is going to be sort of a done-for-you content strategy. So this is, so for anybody that went through the content accelerator piece, I'm just going to start offering this as a done for you service where we build out a full-on content strategy together and start to think about formats and platforms and, you know, building out content funnels to drive at a specific objective. So the only couple products in the market right now are this and the full-on consulting offer, which is, you know, a longer term 8-12 week process to take you from no visual presence to a fully articulated visual story.
Nice. Thank you.
Absolutely.
The only other piece of feedback I would have is you could probably upgrade your audio from your end.
Oh, really? Yeah, my
different mic or something.
My microphone is locked in my WeWork at the moment, so we're
okay. Gotcha.
Quarantined out of good sound quality. Unfortunately, I got some. I think the I think the fan goes on the laptop as well, and some engineer at Apple probably put those things too close together. The fan starts to whir over the internal mic, I think. Let me put these in.
It was fine. It just, it wasn't perfect.
How's that? Is that any better?
I think it's a little clearer, yeah.
All right. Good feedback. I'll figure that out. Cool.
Jack, I've got a question.
Go on, Craig.
So I'm looking at a lot of this kind of trying to visualize processes at the minute in our digital agency, and some of the things I can kind of work out. I can see the process and I can visualize it, but sometimes I'm thinking, is there actually a process here? Because we've done these things for so long, sometimes it's kind of hard to go a little higher and actually see the process. I'm just wondering if you've got any kind of way that you utilize to see that.
Yeah. So I think one of the interesting ways to get at it is and this could be an interesting thing to do within the visualized value community itself, is to just get on the phone with somebody else and explain it to them. You know, like have that external perspective, like have someone figure out the commonalities between your clients. And I think digital agencies are particularly difficult, or agencies in general are difficult, because so few do have like productized offerings. Yeah. I think depending on the nature of the project, you would perhaps have like build a different visual narrative out for, you know, providing sorry, the speaker just went off. And providing a sequence to developing a content strategy would be different to visualizing a sequence for, you know, building a website with a CMS that does X, Y, and Z. So I think the narrowness of the offer makes the visualization component more feasible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does. Because I've started with a fairly small process. So obviously we're a digital agency. We offer website hosting to a certain level. Mm-hmm. But a thing that we've done for a long time is we've done with kind of an all rolled in kind of website support type thing. So that's the place that I started, because I can actually visualize that as a product. So I think trying to work it out as a product helps, but then I'm thinking about the standard product, the standard process we go through for it to actually build a website is the same thing that every single agency says. You know, mm-hmm. You start with ideas, design, development, launch, etc. It's such a standard process that everybody's aware of.
Yeah,
I'm just still trying to figure out a way to kind of make that sound a little bit better than it is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. So the typical client for you, where do they come from? How do they find you?
A referral.
Yeah. And so, has there been like an industry or like a theme in terms of the types of businesses that are referring each other, or it's been all over the place?
It's all over the place, but we work with quite a few e-commerce clients. So
e-commerce and like direct to consumer brands?
No, not really. We do literally work with so many different industries and so many different places that's been a thought of mine for a long time, that we need to niche down into something. But
yeah, so when you say e-commerce, not even necessarily like physical products, what's been the range in the e-commerce brands that you've worked with?
so there's physical products direct to consumer, there's physical products direct to other businesses, there's digital products, there's a mixture of digital versus digital versus actual products, across all kinds of different industries. It is really wide ranging.
Yes, and that's I think one of the observations that I made a while ago was I had a couple agencies as clients for a period of time, and what a lot of people in that process don't realize is they're sort of building products every time they start a new project. You know, like you're essentially answering a new brief, and in that brief, like in your answer to that brief, there is the solution that you make has legs beyond that one application that you use it for. And I think like finding a way to like take advantage of that compounding that compounding knowledge that you're creating. And I think even just off the top of my head, just based off the list that you offered, the idea of helping businesses that sell, let's say, for example, digital product, build a web presence and a like ecosystem of, I'm not saying this is what you want to do. This is completely suggestion. The idea that you would help people build a place to host a digital product and then build a system to drive traffic toward a digital product. So then that starts to become a product that somebody that has an aspiration to create a digital product is attracted towards, and your ability to build solutions for businesses that want to sell digital products just accelerates every client you take through that process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you just confirmed the thing that I was thinking, that to get this kind of visualizing thing to work on something, the product has to be much more niche down to a specific market, single product, single market, ideally, because it's just much easier to visualize it.
Yeah, I think if to go back to some of these ideas here, it's like this idea of a recipe. It's like it generates the same result. If you have the broader the recipe, like the less specific, I think you could still use visuals to sort of, I think the conversation we had last week, this idea of using visuals to showcase the way you think as an agency. It's like, this is why we're different. This is how we think differently. And there's value in that. But in truly being able to like productize and visualize something, there's obviously you have way more leverage in selling, but you also have way more leverage when you deliver too, because that process keeps getting refined, and you just have this flywheel happening where everything you do to deliver for one client, you kind of goes back into the top and starts to perfect it for your next client. But I think it's also about figuring out like what's the combination of things that you are uniquely interested in doing. And that could be something that you just like, you build. One thing that I realized was through like doing this, like creating this process for myself, like creating this product for myself and visualizing the things that layering all these skills together and visualizing how that would be applied to somebody else's business kind of accelerates your own business, and it creates a product for other businesses to follow. So like, it's kind of like this inception thing of how do you create a productized agency. Then like I started getting agency clients when I started thinking about productized agencies. It's like, I've done it. I've figured it out. Now you know, people ask you, how did you get your agency positioned that way? How do you tell your story so succinctly? Oh, let me show you how I did it. This is like the framework that I use. And so you're kind of building your own thing and creating that recipe for other people to follow it. It's a little bit of like a meta, strange concept, but just seeing all the stuff that you're doing now, Craig, it feels like there's value in you sort of productizing the journey that you're on to some degree. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. That's something I've been thinking about for a while, but I don't know what form that's going to take yet.
Yeah, I like it. I've seen, so I've just had so many conversations with so many like incredibly talented agencies, and they just always seem to get into the burnout phase and the cycle of like taking on something that's slightly out of their competence zone each time. It's like you slightly push out and you take on something that requires a little bit of a different skill or needs you to hire a little bit of a different freelance resource, and you never really start to benefit from that compound interest of focusing on the same problem over and over again. But I think even niching down slightly into digital product or direct to consumer brands or whatever it might be also helps you produce content from a lead gen standpoint that's going to resonate with the same types of people. Very hard to promote an agency with that does everything, because your content could just be all over the shop, you know?
It's the biggest thing I realized probably, I don't know, a year ago, 2 years ago, maybe, that working with loads of different clients, the one thing I always ask them, no matter what industry they're in, no matter what they're doing, is who is it for, and can you niche it down more? And then as soon as they do, it's just so much easier to market it.
Yeah.
But then you never take your own advice, do you?
Right. No, you don't, man. You don't. It's until it's forced upon you, until you just can't do it anymore. I think that's like the journey I see most people go through is like, I'm different. I can do a little bit more and a little bit more of everything than everybody else that told me it wasn't possible. I did the exact same thing. Was just came out, land the client, get a little bit of different work, and then your option is to just sort of grow and scale inefficiently and just kind of hire people to plug the gaps, or to just be ruthless and relentless about your focus and take people through the same process over and over again. I will record a video of a little bit more of under the hood of that agency that I was talking about here. This was just ridiculously streamlined and process driven. And it took a long time to get to that point, and to sort of, once it was productized past a certain point, it just, the types of conversations you had from a sales perspective just completely changed. It went from, you know, us trying to convince you that we can do anything to a client convincing you that, you know, they qualify to use the product that you're selling. So it completely flips the script once you have that dialed in to the point where you are prepared to turn people away who don't fit the bill.
I saw it this morning when I put that thing on the Slack group about speaking to that guy for an hour and a half, showing him exactly what we do and how we work. And I got to the end and said, any questions? And they were just like, no, that you've said it. You've said everything.
So what was the visual component of that was resonating, you think? Because this is still a broad pitch, right? Essentially.
Yeah. I basically, it's at the minute, it's just a nice sales deck. I'll show it at some point.
That'd be great.
I think people will get value from it. But still, the majority of the sales deck at the minute, I mean, if I can share my screen, I could probably show you it.
Yeah. Let me give you some control here.